Okay. Good evening. I want to welcome you to East End Books Provincetown for our summer book series. And you can see if you came last year the difference. We had a beautiful waterfront park that the town has built, and last year we had cement slabs and everything. So a lot of you came as we were going all over Provincetown. You probably saw me with my blue wagon with the books, wheeling them all over the place. I'm glad we don't have to do that this year. We've got this beautiful view out here. And this park, also I wanted to say the town did something remarkable in that it really is handicap accessible. You can see that the path, unlike a lot of parks, it's not pebbles that you can't get a wheelchair down. You know, it's I don't know what you call that out there, but it's smooth surface, so you can go out on your own in a wheelchair or be pushed out there. And then there are ramps, so you can get out to the town beach. So it's another feature that I think was remarkable that they did. And of course, the charming European-style bathroom out here. It's one of the few public bathrooms on the East End, so that's another great feature. And we're glad to be out here again. We hope at some point this summer, we'll be able to be out in the park, but at the moment we're on our condo association property for these events. Okay. Afterwards, there'll be a book signing, and then I'll go in after the live stream and sell books to anybody, and then they'll be signing out here. We will have signed books available. People order them on the website as well. And so, other thing, okay. The final event of this month is Thursday, and this is the rescheduled event for Casey Sherman and his new book, Blood in the Water. A week ago, we had his writing and film producing partner Dave Edge here with the State Representative Kip Diggs for the marvelous Marvin Hagler book, and that was quite fascinating. Marvin Hagler used to train in the winters at the Provincetown Inn, and he's from Brockton, Mass, so that's the connection there. Okay, a save the date item, August 15th. I'm co-chairing an event with Neil Jacobs at the Commons, and this is an event that will benefit the Theater Offensive from Boston. I'm proud to be chairing their capital campaign. We're getting closer to building the new theater in the Fenway. And this is a theater company that's, they're right now all across Boston doing shows, and it's for everybody. But in terms of the playwrights, this is groundbreaking. The emphasis is on promoting Black and brown, queer and trans playwrights. And it'll be one of the few theater groups to have their own building, so we're really excited about that. This is an event, I mean, you could pay something if you want, there's information, but it's not a fundraiser. There will be food by bespoke soirees, and there'll be performances from actors from LA and New York. It won't be a sit-down thing, it's 5:30 to 8:30, so there'll be brief performances throughout, so you can come and go, you're not going to be stuck if you have dinner reservations or something else. And you'll meet some remarkable people at this event. If you don't make that, and if you're in the Boston area, on December 7th, I'm co-chairing another event for them with Christy Cashman, the author and actress, at the Quinn. And we'll be at the newest restaurant that Ken Falk has created called Lunasol, which is beautiful. It's like being in Sao Paulo. That'll be still not formal, but more formal, and I think the tickets are $100 for that one. So if you're able to, that's December 7th. Okay. So then, the August schedule is on our website and inside. The first event in August is August 1st with the artist Liz Collins and Eileen Miles. And then a few days after that, I'm doing an event with 20 Summers at their new space, Stanley, which is in the Schoolhouse Gallery building. And Eileen will then be with Cole Barash, the amazing artist. And I just wanted to show you at least this. So they have a limited edition book where Eileen wrote the prose and Cole did the photography. It's called A Walk on Cape Cod. There's so many features I can't even. It's a limited edition of 200, but I just wanted to show you even the in-sleeve that comes. It comes in a special box and all this. It just says, there was nothing there now, we were told. The 1 year in day camp, they dragged us there to see it. A Walk on Cape Cod, Cole Barash and Eileen Miles. So originally, the 20 Summers event was going to be earlier, and that got postponed. So if anybody comes August 1st, for Eileen and Liz will have the book there. And if anybody wants to see it, I have an open copy. They're limited edition 200 and they're $97 each. And their publisher also has a much more expensive limited edition of 15, and we'll have I don't have those here. We'll have information about that if you're interested. So I think that's pretty special, and it's great. It'll be great to see Eileen again. Okay, so, and once I get off of this, I'll try to work on that echo and fix that up. So I'm very excited to have Cynthia here, and it seems like we've been waiting forever. I have for this night to get here. And Cynthia is, of course, a freelance academic editor and an instructor at Emory University in Atlanta, where I spent a lot of time because I'm from Tallahassee. We go there a lot. That's the big city, where she teaches courses on memory and memoir and theories of dream interpretation. Her creative nonfiction has appeared in many places, including Cape Cod Voice, Dreamers Magazine, and others. Linda Kulman is a ghostwriter for Anthony Fauci, Amanda Knox, and others, and I'm very fascinated to hear Linda as well at this event. And I think because of timing and everything else, I'm not going to give a description of the book. We've got it on the website. We're very excited to have you all here, and I'm going to ask my fantastic assistant to do the live stream a little bit longer as I go over here and try to work on this echo.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Would you like me to wait till you work on the echo, or should I just start? Okay. I think that sounds good. Can you all hear? Yeah. Okay, excellent. I'm going to read for 10 minutes from the first chapter titled Impossible Memories. And then Linda is kindly going to converse with me about the book, but also about the challenges of writing memoir, both for oneself and for others. And then we'll open up for Q&A before the book signing. So let's begin. Starts with an epigraph from Emily Dickinson. One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place. Emily Dickinson. Two men wait outside the heavy fur door. The header so low they'll have to duck to enter. 7 months pregnant with me, my mother is somewhere inside, cooking perhaps at the cast iron stove in our roughly finished kitchen. The flat half of the stove stays warm year-round, taking the chill off the unheated room. Above the narrow countertops and windows, blue willow plates and mismatched wine glasses sit on shelves wedged between exposed 2x4s, while 2 straw-covered bottles of Chianti dangle like buoys from a roofing nail hammered into the wall next to Mom's homemade cotton curtains. The kitchen, added to our old wooden house in the 1930s after its conversion from a general store to a home, has gaps near the ceiling where ivy has slipped inside, its grasshopper tendrils finding easy purchase on the coarse interior walls. Mom likes the ivy and the ark-like feel of her home, with its nooks and crannies, its hand-hewn rafters, its window panes of wavy glass. This eccentric house, ripe for imaginings, is a welcome change after 7 years of trailers and army-based lodgings, each as Spartan and predictable as the last. Though it's the middle of July, the thermometer has barely cracked 70 degrees. Too chilly for a dip in the ocean or even one of the kettle ponds sunk among the pitch pines of Wellfleet's back roads. So Mom is at home with her 5 children, none of them yet a teenager, the house no doubt pulsing with their careening and pranks. I can't, of course, know what my mother is doing. Maybe she's not in the kitchen at all, but sitting at her Black Singer sewing machine listening to the Everly Brothers' new hit, All I Have to Do Is Dream, on the transistor radio as she makes a shirt for one of my brothers. Or perhaps she's feeding scrambled eggs to my older sister Thelma, a toddler but the easiest of her children. Or maybe she's writing a letter to her estranged husband, stationed in Germany, to beg again for a divorce. Never mind. It's July 14th, her 32nd birthday, and Mom, who loves celebrations as much as her children do, likely has a cake in the oven. While I can't know what my mother is doing, I do know what she has heard. A knock on the front door. 2 or 3 raps, at once hesitant and hard. I imagine her wondering why no friendly voice has followed the knock. No yoo-hoo or Shirley, or why anyone would knock in the first place. There's no lock on the door, no way to bar entry, no need to. It's the outer cape in 1958, a salt-sprayed arm curling into the Atlantic, a string of fishing villages where tenacious year-rounders negotiate nature and summer tourists rent it. And in Mom's ancient saltbox on LeCount Hollow Road, there's little worth envying or stealing. Perhaps she imagines one of her friends is outside the door, there to surprise her with a handful of birthday flowers or a box of chocolate fudge. No matter the draw, she would be moving more slowly than usual, and not just because of her wide belly. A month or 2 earlier, one doctor after another at the Hyannis Hospital had dug into her right foot, prying loose the snapped tip of a sewing needle that had lodged first in the nubbly rug where Mom had dropped it, and then into metatarsal bone when she stepped on it. After the surgery, Mom had rustled up a pair of crutches, but couldn't manage them on our house's narrow stairs. So if she was busy in one of the 2 upstairs bedrooms when the knock sounded, she would have laughed at herself as she crawled down backward, keeping her center of gravity low to stop from toppling over. The wittiest girl of her high school class, and a party girl long after, she once told me she kept having children because she liked the company, Mom surely hurried as best she could toward the sound and the diversion it promised, perhaps running her fingers through her short auburn curls and tossing her apron, printed with windmills and Dutch maidens, onto the back of a Windsor chair she was refinishing. Or maybe she slapped on some red lipstick and checked her teeth in the mottled, gilt-framed mirror she had wrangled from her parents' attic and hung on nicked pine walls the color of burnt honey. She knew she was attractive, even when pregnant, a card she'd played her entire life. However well composed Mom might be, the house was surely a mess, its flotsam and jetsam of handed-down clothes and dinged furniture strewn with random beautiful objects she had salvaged from yard sales or her parents' more orderly past. One of the 2 men standing outside the door was a familiar face around town, someone Mom shared an occasional laugh with down at Al Graham's piano bar on the harbor, though I imagine he was not smiling so much as grimacing in the cool, bright sun. Perhaps he was shifting uneasily, favoring the leg that had never fully healed from a knife stab during an off-cape scuffle. Given their friendship, it must have taken some arm twisting to get him to Mom's doorstep, to play his part in this birthday errand. The other man, young, raven-haired, blue-eyed, was the last person Mom expected or wanted to see. She hadn't crossed paths with him for 2 years, had been grateful for the ocean that lay between them, for the first of 6 pregnancies where she hadn't fended off his punches or cigarette burns or shoves off the bed. But there he was, Ben Harrow, her nightmare of a husband, muscles twitching in anticipation. And next to him stood Wellfleet's chief of police, who held a warrant for my mother's arrest. Though I couldn't see the violence that followed, science tells me I could feel it. And while I can't consciously remember it, my body surely holds its traces. Mom was in her 3rd trimester when my developing brain was forming hundreds of synapses a second. How did the furious firing of Ben Harrow's fists and curses ricochet through the synaptic firings in my brain. As Mom's cortisol levels spiked, were mine shooting high? As she flung her wedding ring at him, as she shielded herself, as the chief of police intervened to arrest Ben as well, were the early neural networks for extreme emotion and its correlate, extreme behavior, carving enduring pathways in my gray matter? This is what could be called an impossible memory, inscribed but unreadable, a guess and a ghost. Though other ghosts populate this memoir, Ben Harrow's is the most haunting. And this early experience of him, a bodily trace I can neither consciously remember nor touch in the physical archive of scars, remains at once invisible and diffusely present, a radioactive element in a constellation of phenomena that lights one of the many ways I could describe my childhood. This episode also alludes to the lifeblood of nascent memory, its fountainhead, who we are in relation to our mother, first in our womb and then in our journey outside of it. I did not learn about this birthday surprise until I was 40 years old, 5 years after I started interviewing my mother as I raked our family's past for clues to my present. I knew she regretted her first marriage, but nothing I had heard in our earlier interviews, much less during my childhood, had prepared me for the jealous vengeance that drove Ben Harrow to Mom's door, for what happened in that roughly furnished kitchen, or for the shocking arrest and trial of my mother, which lie at the heart of the secrets it took me many years to unravel, and then stitch back together in the writing of this book. Thank you. Hello.
Hi. Is that working? Yeah. When I was listening to
Just hold it close to your mouth.
Oh.
Thank you.
it is okay. Is that better?
Close to your mouth.
Closer.
Yeah, that's good.
I realize you're very comfortable with ghosts, so that must be why I'm up here with you. But I'm very honored.
That was a great pun, Linda.
I'm so honored to be sitting here with you.
I'm honored to be sitting here with you.
I just wanted to start by saying that as a ghostwriter, a lot of the people that I work with are writing their memoirs.
Close, yes.
Is that better?
Yeah, you need
Yeah,
to
just
hold
need
it
to be close to your mouth. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah, okay. A lot of the people that I work with are writing their memoirs to set down their record.
That's
and
right.
really even to burnish their record. And your memoir is so full of recovered memories and family secrets, and I think you told me that some people in your family didn't even want you to write it. So I was wondering if you could talk about what drove you to write it, and really kind of a quest that I think you were on to kind of plumb the depths of it.
Thank you. You know, I think with any book, there's so many reasons that you write. I think I initially set out writing this book because I had this family that was full of secrets and full of kind of extreme stories. There are a lot of stories that didn't make it into this book that prompted me to first start conducting oral histories and wanting to figure out what the hell happened in this family and who are these people and what are some of their stories. And as I recorded at my husband's encouragement, because he's an oral historian among many things, I began to realize, wow, I'd like to write some of these down. And then another part of it was, as I began to realize how fascinating some of these stories were and how they spoke to larger issues, such as poverty in a resort economy or domestic abuse or what have you, I began to realize that growing up as a local in a tourist economy is a very different kind of experience. at least I felt a little bit like I was a prop in other people's vacations or part of the background crew. I waited tables, I cleaned cottages, my sister worked at the general store, my sister checked beach stickers. We were part of what makes summer happen for visitors, both summer residents and particularly visitors. And there's a kind of erasure in that is not intentional on the part of summer visitors. It's just the structure of what a summer resort community is like. You need people to wait on tables. You need people to clean cottages. And I think part of me began to feel like I wanted people to recognize that locals were more than the trays they carried, more than the oysters they shucked, more than the cleaning buckets they carried. And so I wanted to tell some of these stories that otherwise would not be part of the narrative historical record. I mean, of course, some of their statistics would be recorded, but their stories wouldn't be recorded. And so that was another part of it. And then the last part of it was I became really fascinated with questions of memory and narrative identity and forgetting. And I wanted to communicate some of that fascination to readers while also telling stories that allowed me to talk about those more scholarly interests in a narratively compelling way. So it was multifactorial what drove me to writing this book, and it evolved over a long period of time.
Thank you. So tell me, what is it like to be here now as an author?
Wow. Okay. Brian, I'm going to tell a story that involves you. Brian Hawley is my editor at University of Massachusetts Press, and he's a phenomenal editor. And last summer, I think it was, he invited me and my husband out to lunch, and we were at the Flying Fish Cafe, which my friend Lisa Brown set up. She's the one who interviewed me yesterday as well. She started the Flying Fish Cafe, and I was sitting at the table with Brian, my husband, and another writer came by. I don't know if you edited her and you introduced us, and then the waitress came to take our order, and I felt completely bifurcated between being with, like, the words my editor never occurred to me when I was growing up would ever come out of my mouth, right? And I completely identified with the waitress or the server who was waiting on us, and I felt like, all right, which world do I belong in? And I belonged in both, because I made a life for myself off Cape through going to college. I was the only of 7 siblings to go to college and ended up getting a PhD. I was not the smartest person in my family, but I was the most driven to get an education. And yet all of most of my family is still working class, and I love my family. I would never want to feel different from them. And so I really felt those two ways of being in the world. And I'm so grateful for both ways of being in the world. And I feel like I belong in both. So it is a different feeling. It's a very different feeling. And it's validating. Because normally when I came back before, I was just Cynthia, the local coming back to visit her family. But now I think I'm seen in a way that I wasn't really seen before. And that's really affirming.
Yeah, I bet. So I mentioned to you when I first read your book that I felt like I was looking at a shirt turned inside out. In that, it's like looking at the seams. Sorry, I'm not used to this. So the reason I say that is that you don't just write the narrative. You kind of show how the narrative is put together. You show us sitting at the table with your grandmother with a cup of tea and your mother on the porch and in conversation about these kind of hard family stories. And I wondered if you could talk about why you made the decision to tell your story that way.
It's a great question. I really think it's 2 reasons. One is that I wanted to show to readers the collaborative and often negotiated nature of autobiographical memory. I really feel like we are co-authored selves. And by that, I mean not necessarily that we co-author in terms of writing our story, but we co-author our stories through our conversations with our family members and our friends, and we remember things, and our friends and family members remember things, and we're constantly negotiating memory. And I wanted to show that happening kind of in real time in the book. And I do that by saying, okay, I sat down with my grandmother, and here, we began to talk. And so there was that part related to memory that I wanted to show to readers, and to show how we not only have memories, we build memories, and we're constantly evolving our memories, because oftentimes our interpretation of them changes, and that changes the memory. So there's that personal part that's related to autobiographical memory. And I think the other thing that made me want to do that is to show also the research that for me went into the writing of this book, and I think is often the case for any memoirist. So not only oral histories, but documentary research, flight manifests, legal records, phone books going back to the early 1900s so I can figure out where people were, museum archives, historical archives, and then interviews with select people and fisher, aquaculturists, and police officers, because I wanted to be able to write vividly and accurately about things that happened a long time ago, and some of which I was not present for. For example, the orphanage my grandmother was placed into when she was 10 years old. Even though both parents were alive, her grandparents were alive. This was in Lowell, Massachusetts. I did a lot of research, and I visited the former orphanage, which is now became a convent. And I read historical records, I looked up photographs, so that I could I could imagine my grandmother walking up, holding her father's hand to the doors of this massive, gray, stone home in Lowell, Massachusetts. And I could describe the entablature, I could describe the windows, I could describe the staircase, because I went in, I did the research. So I could imagine what it must have felt like for her to reach that door with her father and walk inside and know she had no idea when she was coming out again. And that was not going to be for another 4 years. But I wanted to show the research, and I wanted to show the negotiated nature of memory. I think those are the two things that caused me to write in that, I love your metaphor, the shirt turned inside out to see the seams way.
So I think that when I write memoirs, it's usually, I can interview other people, but it's usually with one, it's a one-to-one relationship. And I think it's hard enough to kind of set down that story, but you took this kind of multitude of voices and wondered what it was like to try to deal with the ambiguity on the page. If someone remembered something differently than you did. Mm-hmm. And what you figured out about kind of who owns memory.
I have to say, I found it very freeing to listen to others' perspectives and to have a less totalizing version of my own story. Mm-hmm. And I don't think everyone's comfortable with that. I had an interview with a social psychologist for a book he's writing on, who had read my memoir and said, I can't believe how comfortable you were with competing narratives about your own father or your own experiences growing up. But there's something very freeing about holding our stories of other people in particular more lightly, and letting countervailing opinions and thoughts and stories coexist with yours. because I think we all know, right? There are multiple versions, true versions of the same event and of the same person. And it's so easy to box a person narratively in, and it's almost never fair to that person. And I think with memoir, it's also tempting to do that. But I didn't want to create black and white characters. I wanted to create nuanced characters. And so that meant that sometimes someone with whom I had a predominantly negative experience, I still had to find other voices that told me more, that colored that person in more. Because I wanted to be, you can never take the complexity of a person and represent that complexity on the flat surface of a page. But you can try hard. And trying hard means listening to things, to stories that might not align entirely with yours. And I think that's more freeing, to be honest. Other people find it worrying, but I don't.
I think to that end, one of the things that I was the most moved by in your book is a dream you had about your father, who I think you had a pretty difficult relationship with. And I wondered if you could talk about the dream and then kind of what it did for you.
So, my father was a very strict and non-communicative disciplinarian, and I was basically terrified of him growing up. And I had a lot of negative dreams about him in my 20s and 30s. He never abused me. I mean, he did like whip me. He whipped all of his kids, but he never, he wasn't abusive. It was just to correct us. But
I'm going to jump in, and say he died when you were 15.
He died
right?
when I was 15, yes. And my parents were divorced when I was 14, and my father died 9 months later, and my mother felt very guilty for a long time, all her life, I think, because he died of a heart attack, and I think she thought he died of a broken heart as well, because he was very loyal to our family. So I never really dealt with my father, and then in therapy or in my conversations with other people, my mother was such a lively, charismatic, complicated character. She was enough material for a lifetime. And then I wrote up a version of this chapter, and I showed it to my cousin Richard, who was my next door neighbor. There were two Blakeley brothers who had houses next to each other. And I gave him the chapter to read, and he read it, and he's a fisherman in Wellfleet. And he walked back in, and he's like, "Cindy, you got this ass backwards." This is not the man I remember. I loved your father. He brought us, to all your beach parties and to, the golfing range and clamming, and you got this wrong. And that was when I really began to think, all right, I've had this really convenient narrative of my father. Oh, he's the reason I'm a feminist. He was a patriarch, he was scary, et cetera, et cetera. And my dream life started changing around the same time, and I started having more positive dreams of my father. And they kind of struck me, wow, that's a positive dream of my father. And I didn't realize that at the time, but I really began to have this archipelago of dreams about my father that became more and more positive. And in that chapter, I talk about the ways in which dreams can almost feel like episodic memories. And I was experiencing my father in these dreams. They were laying down new neural circuits for our relationship. And they culminated in this almost transcendent dream of seeing him, where Jung would have called it a numinous dream, where this incredible current of love between us was exchanged. And I said to him, "Dad, what's going to happen to me in the future?" And he took my hands in his, and he said, You know, there are times you're going to want to kill yourself, but you're not going to do that. You're going to live a long life. And it was, I woke up with tears streaming down my face. It was so healing and reparative. And it was this experiential aspect of dreams that created new memories of my father for me. And my relationship with my father is fundamentally changed. And I began to look much more honestly at all the amazing ways that he parented us. He took me golfing, he took us sailing, he took us clamming, he took us to beach parties, he organized vacations. My mother was a wounded mother, and she was a drinker, and he stepped in, he made us breakfast every single morning before we caught the school bus. All that stuff I had conveniently left out of my internal narrative of him because it didn't serve my narrative of, he hit us. Because we remember being hit. It's hard to be hit when you're a little kid, right? And so I feel like I'm being much more fair to my father, and I am I have a much warmer feeling toward him because of my dream life.
Besides dreams and memory, you also talk about forgetting and the power of forgetting. And I think that's not something that people often, usually in a memoir, you kind of try to, seam things together so it doesn't seem like you've forgotten anything.
Yeah.
But I wondered if you could talk about the power of that.
The neurologist Scott Small describes forgetting as a cognitive gift. And I tend to agree with him. It's a cognitive gift. He's talking about it because, if you remembered everything, you really wouldn't be able to function, right? Very well. You need to be able to understand the gist of things, but forgetting goes deeper than that. I think of forgetting as a way of creating negative space in art or in music, right? That allows other things to move into the foreground. And the psychologist Jacqueline Burkell also talks about the importance of remembering what is important and forgetting what's not, and that by forgetting we create room for personal growth. I mean, we've all misbehaved in life, right? We've all treated people unkindly at certain junctures. We've done things wrong that we're not pleased with. To keep berating ourselves with those moments ties us to a version of ourselves that is not doing us any good. Once we have recognized that we don't want to be like that anymore. And a certain amount of forgetting allows us to become better versions of ourselves, to allow for personal growth. And so there's a chapter on forgetting that's related to a bully that I endured in elementary school for an entire year, and you can read about it, but I met up with her again about 10 years ago. She left the Cape in 8th grade, never heard from her again, and she was mortified when I told her what had happened. And she said, and the horrible thing is, I have no memory of it. I mean, this was a year-long campaign. It was not like she beat me up in the hallway once. It was an entire year, and she bullied other people. And I think that she did not remember bullying me because she had a very difficult home life that I was unaware of and that I learned about, and that she was not remembering the pain she caused me. She was remembering the pain that she was enduring in her home life, and I was a casualty of that pain. And that she was a hurt kid who hurt other kids. And she hurt a lot of kids. There's a whole group of us. But she doesn't remember any of that. And she never had kids because she said to me, I never wanted to treat a child in the way that I was treated, and I couldn't trust myself. But I think she's become a much better version of herself. She's lived a much more positive life as an adult. And now my memory of that year of 4th grade has changed very significantly because I see her before all I could see was what she was doing to me. And now I realized our childhoods were interlaced and we had this effect on each other. It's not just my story or her story, it's our story.
Thank you. I think that seems like a good time to kind of bring in other stories.
Yeah, if you
other
have any questions, we could launch into the Q&A.
If you could just summarize the individual's question, just
Sure.
that would be all right.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to thank you. I think it's a fascinating conversation, and it's such an important thing. Memoirs are very important to me, and I'm so thankful that you do what you do, and that you help other people with get their stories out in the public. That's publishing them. So I just wanted to say that because it is so fascinating.
Thank you. Can you hand her the mic, maybe? And
Yeah.
that would get her on.
I came from a family with, there were 5 of us. And it's amazing to me when I hear you say that the process of negotiating with other people about their memories and that are supposedly your memories, and it's peaceful, evidently. None of you have killed each other, nothing like that. I have very close relationship with all my siblings, but I swear to God, sometimes we grew up in 5 different houses.
You actually did. You're right. You grew up in 5 different houses.
And if one of us was to write, the other 4 would have a lot to say about that. I'm sure. I mean, and each of us would believe as passionately as the others that the truth of what we were saying. But it's astounding how differently 5 and people can look at the same incident. And,
That's right.
And you know, we all know we're right, and so we agree to disagree. But if somebody committed it to writing, I don't know.
Well, you bring up such an interesting point. And there are many true versions of the same event, of course, but then I think that many memory scientists and people who write about narrative would say something along the lines of all memory is interpretive. It's never the thing itself. As soon as something happens, we're interpreting what happened. And Ruth Ellen Jocelyn is a psychologist who did this really fascinating study of over 35 years. Every 5 years, she interviewed this woman about a significant breakup she had when she was in her late teens. And that memory changed every 5 years. It was different. The content didn't change. Her understanding of it and her memory of it changed. So on the one hand, I do think that's absolutely true that all memory is interpretive. And a more disconcerting way of describing it would be, to say our story is it might be fictional in ways, but it's our fiction. And one of the things that I try to underscore in this book is that we live up to the stories that we tell about ourselves. But stories not only reflect our past and who we are, but they shape who we are in the present. And so I tell my students at Emory, be mindful of the stories that you foreground and choose to tell about yourself. Because guess what? You are going to fill the space of those stories. Those stories are going to shape who you're becoming and who you are in the future. And this actually is what happens in the brain. The same circuitry that remembers is this circuitry that projects into the future. So there's a fair amount of curation of memory and like you say, negotiation as well. But we do have our own individual relationships with our parents and with our siblings. And yeah, it can get contentious, and we can go to the mat defending our own version. But I do like then to say, okay, they coexist. They're both true, or all 5 of them in your case. This gentleman, yeah.
So you teach memory, so you must have ideas about genre in your head, and so for a long time, memoir was the thing, especially after Mary Carr and Frank McCourt set off their fireworks. But then about maybe 10, 12 years ago, memoir shaded into autofiction, as when Carl Nausgaard unloaded. And I've thought a lot about myself about what are the differences between a memoir and an autofiction. I have no conclusions, but did you feel the pull of autofiction, which is the genre du jour as you were working on it, and did you feel the pull of fiction? Did you want to novelize things, or were you more concerned with accuracy?
I was more concerned with accuracy, which is why I did so much research and so much fact checking and so many interviews. But I would have to say, to your point, I had to employ the fiction writer's craft to set scenes. And so, for example, that opening scene that I read, I was inside my mother's womb. I couldn't see what was happening. I feel the most honest way to address such scenes, you need to flesh them out for the reader, create a visual, and include what Mary Carr would call carnal detail. But I'm always signaling to the reader when I'm doing that. So I'll say, I imagine my mother sitting at this black Singer sewing machine. She had a black Singer sewing machine. I know exactly what that room looked like because I have photos from that time, and so I could describe the 2 bottles of Chianti rolling like buoys hanging from a roofing nail, my mother's curtains. I'm not going to make anything up. If I'm imagining a person's thoughts, like my grandmother when she entered the orphanage, or or my mother when she was at the Provincetown courthouse standing trial for adultery and being convicted and sentenced to jail in the Barnstable House of Corrections. Well, right down the street, folks. It happened in 1958 when she was 8 months.
Did you get it scarred on the A for it?
Yes, it was sewn right onto her cloak. No, it wasn't. But it was her ex-husband. It was her first husband's way of torturing her and humiliating her and getting custody of 2 of their 4 children. But it was Charlie Frazier. If any of you are old Wellfletians, you'll know he was the town boss at Wellfleet. And he became an assistant attorney general of the state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But I couldn't, so I interviewed a cop from that era. I interviewed a former Provincetown selectman. Like, what did the inside, and I looked at pictures, what did the inside of that look like? And so I was able to describe the inside of that courtroom. What did Charlie Frazier look like? What did Judge Welsh look like? And so I looked at it. I found photos. I described as accurate, because accuracy is really important to me. But then in my writing, I would say, I imagine Mom sitting at that defense table, staring at the books of the Commonwealth laws, or what I imagine her looking and feeling, and I tell the reader I'm imagining, because I don't know. I can only imagine. And Jessamine Ward does this beautifully in her book, Men We Reaped, her memoir, Men We Reaped, where she writes about a lot of men who died. She's African-American, grew up in rural Mississippi, and she writes about 5 men who died before the age of about 25. And she doesn't know what was going inside their heads, and over again, she says, it must have gone like this, or I imagine it was that, or perhaps, or maybe. And that to me is the honest acknowledgement of a memoirist, whereas a person writing autofiction is not going to say that. A person writing autofiction is going to use some true elements from their life and then weave an entirely fictional, a largely fictional account. But that's not for me. It's a great question. Thank you.
weren't we saying right before this talk that you're the only author I know who's written from a year-rounder's perspective? That's so fascinating. And what you said about kind of feeling invisible, feeling like you disappeared. I don't think that was the right word.
No, erased.
Erased from the narrative, which is essentially a narrative of, like, if anybody is going to sort of define the Cape, it would be the people who live here year round, but it kind of is not the story that's told. And I think that's fascinating. I don't even know what to say about it, but I feel like there's just a ton of material there, and I don't know if you can say more about it, but I definitely want to read about it.
I have thought more about it because I agree with you. I've not found another memoir written by a local from the Outer Cape or the Lower Cape. I haven't looked so much for the Upper Cape, but there are so many local stories. So mine is just one. I don't want to ever say this is representative. There are elements that might be representative, but there was such diversity among locals. So my friend Lisa, who interviewed me last night, she grew up on, down by Boundbrook Island, and her father was an architect, and she had many, Pete Seeger would come to her house. Pete Seeger never came to our house, right? So she had a very different kind of local experience because she was more part of the intelligentsia. And then my friend Wayne, they had a cottage colony, and that was a different experience. We were just poor and living on LeCount Hall Road. But another part of it that I sometimes think of, I used to get so mad as a kid, driving down Route 6, thinking, why aren't the grocery stores in Wellfleet, why isn't the First National open during the winter? Don't we deserve to be able to buy food? I wanted to stick up for locals because everything shut down, and so it wasn't anything intentional. That was just a business decision, right? But I used to think, why do we have to drive to Orleans to get groceries? And that's just the structure of the situation. It's not anyone's intention.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, is there anyone who didn't want you to tell these stories?
Yeah, I think probably there's, I don't know personally which of my siblings have read the book. I know my sister Thelma has read it, and she offered so many details that were so helpful. But my siblings we're a somewhat fractured family because of my mother's trial and the loss of two of her children. And several of those half-siblings have passed away. So I think in any family there are probably people who wouldn't want, like you were saying, wouldn't want certain stories to be told. But I do have to say, I think my mother found it very validating. So validating, even though during the interviews sometimes she'd say, damn you, I do not want to talk about Ben Harrow, and for another minute, I have had bad dreams last night, etc., etc. But you know what? She went to a lawyer's office and she notarized every single page of my account of her marriage because she said, I don't want this story erased. And then she started taking personal writing courses at Knox Middle School, adult education. I think she absolutely supported the writing of this book, even though she was ambivalent about telling me some of the stories because it was so painful for her. She had suppressed a lot of these stories. But again, I think, what happens? People begin to feel seen, and that's a validating experience. It might be, one more, maybe one more.
Do you think time also plays a role in when that is the right time to write a memoir about families? In other words, you're writing it now,
That's right.
and thankfully you've had that kind of oral history with your mom to inform and kind of really develop how you would, how you thought it. But it's the duration of the many years, where you are in your life now, does that play a role in the right timing of when you wrote this?
Well, I wrote two versions of this book. The first version I finished around 2004. My mom was still alive then. She died in 2014. And that was I cut about 75% of that in this version because I realized I really wanted to organize it around questions of memory and narrative identity and forgetting. But that's a great question because I let it sit for about 10 years. And I started my own freelance business. I went back to teaching. I've been teaching for over 10 years now at Emory and have had this flourishing editing business. But I kind of had to reach, one of the things that teaching memoir taught me, I got to look under the hood of all these memoirs and to see, okay, what works, what makes a great memoir. That helped. And then I got really interested in questions of the social science and neuroscience of memory. And yeah, I think having my grandmother pass away, my uncle Clyde, about whom I write, my mother, it began to feel like time. But I like to think they're in the stratosphere somewhere, happy about this book. And I think they would be if I think my mother would have loved this book. And I certainly couldn't have written it without her and without her honesty and her courage in telling me. Like, I had no idea of that adultery trial when she was pregnant with me. And I didn't know to even ask her about it. It just came out in a conversation. And it floored me. So I think that I think the book had to evolve with me, both emotionally and intellectually. Yeah. But I think that's it's 7 o'clock. I don't want to overstay our welcome. Thank you so much, Jeff, for hosting this event.
Thanks for coming. It's great.
Really appreciate it. And thank you, Linda. Unless people want to ask Linda questions about ghostwriting, I don't know if we have time about that because she's fascinating and has told me many interesting stories about ghosts. Am I allowed to ask her a question?
Sure, of course.
Okay, thank you. Do you mind just sitting for one more minute about it? So, Linda, can you talk a little bit about your experience of writing memoir for other people?
Well, it's very different than what you went through, except for the research part. And I, like you, try to place people physically accurately and look at letters and historical records to have it as accurate as possible in that way. But honestly, every memoir I've done has been different. And for one book I worked on for 10 years. One book I didn't just talk to the person that I was interviewing, but 100 other people who all kind of added to his memory of events. And one was really based on someone's meticulous journals, daily journals. So it's a really variable experience.
In our conversations, you said something super interesting, which was one of the things that that the people you work with have. One of the things you've noticed is that they seldom factor in luck. They feel like their stories are so significant because these are significant people: Anthony Fauci, Hillary Clinton, Amanda Knox, Mac. But that they don't really factor in luck.
Yeah, that is true. I think the people that I work with are mostly kind of accomplished on the record, or they have a story that is like Amanda Knox that's well known, and so they think they've gotten there through hard work. In the main, it's not true of everyone, but I think that one of the things that and we talked about this, that I'm so drawn to with your story, besides just the value of it and the beauty of your writing, is that I think that every family and every person has a story. And
tell that story about working on it.
Please. I was telling Cynthia a couple of days ago that I worked with a man who was the same age as my father. They were 10 days apart, and this man was accomplished in politics and business, and my father was a small businessman and a really good father, and my dad was dying, and still I was working on this other book, and I always felt like I was working on the wrong book. Basically, my father's story never came out, and I never got to talk to him in a way that I plumbed the depths of other people's stories.
And may I end with saying, write. Write your stories, whether for yourself or for your children or for your family members. And if you are lucky enough to have parents and grandparents who are still alive, interview them. You have no idea the stories you will hear if you spend some time interviewing your family members. And your experience of your family will change, and your relationships will change. It's even from the basic courtesy and compliment of showing interest in someone in your family's story. But then you get all these other things, like these extraordinary stories that come out, these kind of underwater blasts in your family history. I would have never learned of so much of my grandmother and my mother's stories if I just hadn't sat down with a recorder and said, please tell me your stories. And they enriched my life. It wasn't just about them, and it really enriched our relationship too. So please write and interview and open your heart and your mind to your own story and to the stories of those close to you. It will change you in wonderful ways. Thank you for coming and being here with us all.